Estonia has accused Russia of violating its airspace, calling the incident an unprecedented intrusion. Estonian officials say 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets crossed into Estonia, a member of both NATO and the European Union. The government in Tallinn says the warplanes entered its airspace early on Friday near the island of Vaindloo in the Gulf of Finland and remained there for 12 minutes without permission. NATO says the alliance responded immediately and intercepted the Russian aircraft, adding that this was yet another example of reckless Russian behavior. The EU's chief diplomat, Kaja Kallas, called the incursion an extremely dangerous provocation. She says this marks the 3rd such violation of EU airspace in days and further escalates tensions in the region, adding that the EU stands in full solidarity with member country Estonia. DW correspondent Natalia Smolentceva in Riga told me more about the incident in Estonian airspace today.
So what we know so far is that this morning 3 Russian jets, MiG-31, entered Estonian airspace, and they stayed there for 12 minutes. And this is significant because this incident happened before, but before there were less than a minute or up to 3-4 minutes, and 12 minutes, it's really a lot. And in that time, of course, Italian jets have been lifted up to protect the space. And the Russian jets, while they were in Estonian space, they had no flight plan. They had not transponders were not functioning, and they could not communicate, or Estonian flight authorities could not communicate with them, so they didn't know what they were doing there. And basically, Italian jets who were stationed right now here in Estonia as a part of a NATO mission to protect Baltic skies, they were lifted up from the ground to try to protect Estonian airspace.
How did the Estonian government and also NATO, of course, respond, given that Estonia is part of the defense alliance?
So the immediate response of NATO was taking up these Italian jets, and as you already said, that's stressed that this is a reckless actions on part of Russia, but that the NATO is strong and was able to respond quickly and in proper manner to this threat. What local authorities say is that the foreign ministry have summoned Russian top diplomat here in Estonia and given them a note, a diplomatic note, and voiced the protest over these actions. And what they say is that it's not the first time this is happening. This is 4th time this is happening in a year. But this one is unprecedentedly brazen because it was such a long incursion, and it was also not just the one incident. It was followed by, it was following of the incident in Poland, and we have seen drones flying into Baltic airspace basically on a weekly basis now.
How are these Russian actions seen in Estonia and in the Baltic neighboring states?
So in Estonia and here in Latvia and Lithuania as well, they've seen as attempts, Russian attempts to test local defense capabilities, basically, to test the boundaries of NATO and EU. And as I said, these incidents are actually on a weekly basis. Just yesterday, actually, we've seen here in Latvia a drone on a Latvian beach. We don't know whether it flew there or it was taken by the waves. We've seen incident in Poland. We've seen other, in Romania as well, we've seen other drones flying into this airspace. And here, people don't see this as just mistakes or isolated incidents, but rather as a part of hybrid warfare against Baltic states, against NATO, against EU. And they say it's to basically to scare Europeans and to test the boundaries of their defense systems.
That was DW correspondent Natalia Smolentceva. Thank you so much. And let's get the view from Brussels. DW correspondent Christine Mhundwa is following the story from there for us. Christine, we've heard condemnation from both the EU and NATO, but beyond words, what concrete steps can they actually take? And are they prepared to take in unison to respond to this Russian incursion?
Well, I guess we'll have to wait for the start of October to get more of a sense of what it is that the response is going to be, because the EU Council President Antonio Costa has said that at a meeting that is scheduled, was a planned gathering, EU leaders will discuss a collective response to this and other incursions by Russia into EU airspace. But for now, we know that NATO has stepped up. It has intercepted those fighter jets in Estonian airspace, as it did the drones a few days ago in Poland. And that's really important because without that, the Baltic nations are particularly vulnerable. So that NATO response, and you would have heard it too from Germany's foreign minister as well as the NATO spokesperson, underscoring NATO's response in all of this, that the alliance, even though tested, has stepped up.
This is only the latest in a series of incidents. Can you walk us through how the EU and NATO, of course, as well, interpret Russia's motives behind these actions?
Well, Nicole, given the duration of this incursion, as Natalia was alluding to there, I don't think anybody is under any illusions about whether this was a mistake or not. I think that is perfectly clear. In fact, some would be suggesting that this would have been cleared right up top in the Russian hierarchy, and possibly even by President Vladimir Putin himself. And you would have heard the EU's chief diplomat, Kaja Kallas, who, by the way, is Estonia's former prime minister, saying that this was a dangerous provocation by Russia. So it is being seen as that. But just take a step back and look at the context that we're in. Just 48 hours ago, essentially, you had Poland calling for a NATO-backed no-fly zone over Ukraine. And this is something that Ukraine's Western allies have been discussing. So one wouldn't be going too far by thinking perhaps Russia is provoking in a way that would see the alliance redeploy or rather deploy more resources to protecting the Baltic airspace, meaning that you have less resources to provide for a potential no-fly zone over Ukraine. No doubt the pressure is on right now, and we've seen, of course, hearing from the Estonian foreign minister that this is not the first incursion, but 12 minutes. This had to have been planned as officials here are seeing it, and therefore there is probably some kind of a direct motive. No one will know exactly what the motive is, but given the conversation about no-fly zones over Ukraine, one could imagine that this would provide some kind of an incentive for the Russians to have resources deployed elsewhere rather than for the NATO-backed no-fly zone for Ukraine.
A day of high tensions at the EU and NATO headquarters today, for sure. That was DW correspondent Christine Mhundwa. Thank you so much for your reporting. Last week's incursion by Russian drones into Poland exposed major gaps in Europe and NATO's defenses. Now the European Union wants to create a defensive drone wall along its eastern borders.
Air raid sirens, closed airspace, fear among residents that death could come from above. Not all too familiar scenes from Ukraine, but from NATO territory, after almost 20 Russian drones invaded Polish airspace.
I'm from Ukraine. I came to Poland. I thought it would be better.
We were sort of not mentally prepared for those sirens.
NATO says militarily it was prepared, and that the fact it shot down 3 drones shows populations are not in danger. But shooting down drones with fighter jets is not cost-effective in the long run. The Baltic states and Poland have long been asking for what they call a drone wall, but it doesn't yet exist.
At this point, anti-drone defense systems in NATO countries still need to be developed.
Polish Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski says Ukraine could teach Europe the lessons it's learned the hard way.
It has plenty of experience with dealing with drones, both electronically and kinetically, that we need to integrate in our procurement and our doctrine.
NATO says its new Eastern Sentry mission, launched in response to the incursion, will be collecting and using all this knowledge and experience. But it's not just Ukrainians who are ahead, warns Ian Bond from the Center for European Reform.
The Russians now are setting up at least one large factory for manufacturing drones. And I think, Ukraine and Europe between them have got to figure out a way to build both offensive drones and counter-drone measures at least as fast, if not faster.
The former head of NATO's military committee, Admiral Rob Bauer, says both the alliance and its citizens need to better prepare for more drones and even worse. Does this mean, Admiral Bauer, that NATO is at war?
For sure, we're not at peace. We are in sort of the gray zone between peace and war, and that requires a different set of rules, and it requires a different mentality, and it requires us to be paying attention, and it requires us to focus more.
Despite more NATO resources already pouring into Poland under Eastern Sentry, Moscow doesn't seem deterred, maybe just diverted, as a Russian drone entered Romanian airspace over the weekend.
Let's bring in William Alberque from the Pacific Forum and a former NATO Arms Control Director. How would you describe NATO's drone and anti-drone capabilities right now?
I would say that we're very far behind where we need to be right now. As Ian mentioned in Terry's interview, Russia is producing drones at scale with help from the Iranians and from the North Koreans. They have their own factories that are producing hundreds of drones. And, you know, they're using a lot of them against Ukraine, but when that conflict stops, they're going to be producing these at scale, stocking them up for a potential conflict with NATO. And we don't have the point defenses, we don't have the integrated air and missile defense, and as mentioned earlier, we don't have the cheap ways to knock down lots of drones. We're learning from the Ukrainians, but we're behind the ball.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the help Russia's getting from Iran and North Korea, but I mean, the NATO alliance is much more than that, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Unfortunately, a lot of European defense cooperation tends to be slow in getting off the dime in building industrial capacity at scale, whereas Russia, North Korea, and Iran are a lot more flexible in terms of crash building, obviously because Russia is at war, and there are still some allies that don't understand that we are in this pre-conflict phase with Russia and need to produce at scale really, really quickly. You're right, the economics are there, the organization is there. We just need to actually build our own defenses and drone capabilities really, really rapidly.
And Ukraine is already in a much better position at producing its own drones. So what can NATO learn from it?
It's really the techniques. How is Ukraine dealing? Because what Russia is doing is they flood the zone with these really, really cheap drones that if you shoot them down with the really expensive missiles, you end up running out of those missiles. And then Russia fires the more advanced systems in to strike the really critical targets. So we're learning from Russian techniques. We're learning from what they're doing. We're watching the Ukrainians and helping them to develop successful techniques. But the Ukrainians are really on the forefront of this. They're the bleeding edge of how to deal with drone strikes. But we're also learning from Israel and Iran and other areas where we've seen these types of techniques being used. But we have so much more to learn.
So, William, what risks do drone incursions pose for NATO's mutual defence clause, known as Article 5?
Right, and this is part of Russia's longer-term behavior. They take risks, they probe us, they do things that don't look like a direct attack, but look like, oh, maybe it was an accident, whatever, to see what our resolve is, to see what kind of responses we do. And so Russia is trying to go right up to the line in terms of Article 5. Can they poke us? Can they find divides within the alliance? And I think that actually Eastern Sentry is an example of how NATO reacted swiftly as part of the Euro-Atlantic deterrence and defense concept, what we call the DDA. This enhanced vigilance process meant that we were able to put Eastern Sentry into effect immediately. And it shows Russia that there will be costs if they continue this behavior. And I actually think Russia hits you where they think you're weak, not where you're strong. So I expect as this program continues to roll out and as NATO enhances its defense posture in the East, that Russia is going to find other ways to strike us. But that's why, as Terry said, they went through Romania because we had been concentrating forces in Poland. So I think we have to enhance our posture across the entire alliance, especially all the way north and south in the East.
Great to get your analysis, William Alberque. I'll see you again very soon.
We're joined now by international security expert Dr. Kerry Chávez to discuss whether the alliance is prepared for the era of drone warfare. Welcome to DW, Dr. Chávez. What lessons, first of all, can Poland's drone incident offer NATO right now?
I think some of the reports you just aired are spot on. Some of the lessons are that the readiness is now. They have been in research and development. They have been preparing operational plans. But these two incursions suggest that they need to be sprinting toward a sustained solution.
So you're saying a sustained solution is needed. I mean, are NATO's current counter-drone defensives ineffective right now?
I'm not saying they're ineffective. The way that they interdicted the drones over Poland a few days ago, they were effective, but it's not cost sustainable to bring manned craft, exquisite and advanced military-grade craft against inexpensive drones, especially when they are sent more densely, more frequently, if that does end up being the case. Ideally, what they did was signal incredible strength and resolve in response to that incursion that will deter future incursions into NATO territory. But nonetheless, having the ability to deter by denial is important for them. And if they're going to do it over the long haul, they're going to have sustainable solutions or a suite of solutions. So the cost exchange ratio of using advanced craft is not useful over the long term. But there are other solutions. There are the electronic, the electromagnetic, and other kinetic options that don't require quite the same human or cost commitment. So I have no doubt that they are considering what is the correct suite of options and that politicians are considering the most prudent response so as not to escalate this.
Could drones actually trigger an Article 5 crisis? So just to remind our viewers, Article 5, of course, being NATO's defence clause that states when one member is attacked, it's considered an attack on all members.
I think that is the crucial question right now, because precedents and norms over drone use in the past, all the way back from the global war on terror, where the US was fielding advanced drones over sovereign territories, in some cases without permission, those did set precedents. And there's no clear legal frameworks over how drones fit into the broader spectrum of conflict and use of force. They are unmanned, so operated remotely, risk averse. They tend to cause less escalation. So I expect that it's a key reason behind the intent to use them in a situation like this for an incursion or for potentially a probe, if it was not accidental. So those norms are actively being developed in this crisis. How drones are going to be perceived as a use of force, if they're going to reach the threshold of UN Article 57 about what constitutes an armed attack that merits defense. So I think that's actually an open question that key policymakers need to be answering right now.
What concrete steps should NATO be taking right now to avoid falling behind?
To avoid falling behind, they need to be doing the exact steps they're doing, one, with establishing a strong and unified front, with devoting resources to the right areas so that they can deter in the near and long-term future. They also need to be addressing these more normative issues, these definitional issues, and they need to have clear operational concepts that they're ready to deploy with resolve, with political will, so that across all the instruments of power, they're prepared to deter Russian aggression.
And just a quick question about cost. How much is this going to cost? I mean, does NATO risk burning through a load of money here to try and get ahead on this?
It's hard to assess how much it would cost because that entirely depends on the suite of solutions they turn toward. And many of those are likely to be at least secretive, if not classified. So ideally, it wouldn't require them to burn through massive amounts of resources because it doesn't require Russia as many resources. So that cost exchange ratio must be more equivalent for this to not have an offensive advantage on Russia's side. So I'm hopeful that they are being wise on the cost front. And at the same time, we have to consider it in context. It's a cost-benefit ratio. And at the end of the day, stopping a full-scale conflict is worth quite a bit.
International security expert Dr. Kerry Chávez, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Joining me now is Dr. Dominika Kunertova from Harvard's Belfer Center, who researches how emerging technologies are reshaping warfare and what that means for European security. Dr. Kunertova, welcome to DW. Let's begin with this latest Russian violation of Estonia's airspace. What does that tell us about the state of European security?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Well, unfortunately, this Russian violation of Estonian airspace is not the first one this year, and it's not going to be the last one. And so the same goes for the drones, in the incursion into the Polish airspace. By now, it's obvious that these incidents are not a mere accident, but they also fall short of the threshold of a military aggression. So to me, they subscribe to this growing list of Russia's sabotage activities across Europe and the Baltic Sea. But let me tell you this: I believe that not even the best air defense systems in the world would stop Russia from launching these drone expeditions into sovereign territory of NATO countries, and this is because. They are basically a tool of intelligence gathering at this point. Remember, those drones were not armed; they were not having any warhead, and they were used to, as it was mentioned on your segment, that they're testing the responsiveness of NATO air defenses, performance, for Russians to take note, like how would NATO react to such an aerial threat.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we can expect more of them, but to say that it's absolutely necessary for NATO countries and European countries to continue strengthening their air defenses, because countering drones with fighter jets, it's not a sustainable strategy. And they know that.
I want to look at the more sustainable strategies in a second, but first, what should be the lessons that EU and NATO could draw from incidents like the ones we've seen this week?
Well, the lesson learned would be to expect more of them, and also not to set up the expectation that any effort will stop Russia from launching them. However, with the East century, that is an important collective signaling to counter any Russia narrative about a weak NATO. And as we've heard about the initiative to set up the European drone wall, well, that is, to me, it's a very good signal. Because at least at the paper, it looks like the strategy is to set up a multi-layered air defenses, which means combine the different tactics with different ranges to increase the response time for NATO to counter such drones. And let me be clear, this is not something new to NATO. There's at least 2 decades of these efforts to counter small drone threats, especially in the context of the war against terrorism. With the war in Ukraine, these efforts has only intensified, and I believe NATO is right now about to approve its first ever counter-drone doctrine.
Yeah.
So
I want to pick up on something you said earlier, that fighting drones with fighter jets is not a sustainable solution. How well is Europe integrating drone technology today into its defense strategy already?
Yeah, exactly. That points to the main challenge, basically, that it's the cost is really favoring the offense. So the task right now is to find ways how to counter these drones in a way that it's not going to cost millions of dollars per pop to counter a small system that is only thousands of dollars. So in this sense, it's really important that individual countries are stepping up their effort, and not only in procuring and investing into this new defense systems, but also scaling up the interceptors, the effectors, and integrating them into existing structures. Because as I say, in my research on defense innovation, it's never only about new technology. You also have to factor in the efforts and the time that it takes to train the personnel to use these systems effectively and integrate them in the structures. And especially in Europe, we are always talking about collective efforts, so cooperating with the other countries.
That was Dr. Dominika Kunertova from Harvard's Belfer Center. Thank you so much for all those insights.
Thank you for having me.